Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. FPL this year has been particularly challenging because you quite simply can't have all of the best premium players every single week. So what this video is going to do is tell you when you want them and when you want to get rid of them. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be fantastic. For now though, let's crack on with the show. So the first player, of course, we have to talk about is Erling Haaland, the most premium of all of the players, 15.4 million. It's a lot of money to be spending on one player, one position in your FPL teams. So the big question is he actually worth it? Is he a player that you need to have in your side because he's just inevitable? And the answer is most game weeks, no. You could easily build a very, very good team without Erling Haaland in it. And most weeks, you'd probably be okay if you had the right combination of the other premiums to offset his performances. Now, 10 goals already in just 7 game weeks goes to show that this guy does get points. He does get the hauls, and he will hurt you if you don't own him. So this isn't saying that he's just going to continue to blank like we've seen in the last couple of game weeks, and you're not going to have to worry about him. He is going to be a very significant factor, and at times this season, it's almost going to be inevitable that you have to bring him in. And I think despite the fact he's blanked twice now in 2 game weeks, one of which at home, which is very rare for Erling Haaland, I think the fixtures coming just are way too tempting to go without Erling Haaland for me. Wolves, Southampton are 2 of the best teams that Man City could possibly be playing right now. Both of them are sat on 1 point in the Premier League so far, both of which have had very porous defences. And I can imagine Erling Haaland is licking his lips thinking, I can get back to goal scoring ways in the next 2 game weeks, especially now that Kevin De Bruyne and Phil Foden are looking likely to be back fit and ready to play in the next couple of game weeks. He's going to have that supply line, that supply chain of great chances coming his way. So I imagine he's going to be hauling in the next few game weeks. It's not just the next 2 either. It's also the next 3 after that. Bournemouth, not exactly defensively solid. Brighton as well, we've seen what they are doing with their high line, and Erling Haaland absolutely loves those kind of chances, those long runs in behind a slow turning fullback or a centre back. He is definitely going to capitalise on that. And Tottenham at home, again, is not a fixture that in any way you're scared of. I think the main thing with Erling Haaland this year is whether or not you plan on captaining him. And I think this season, if you can find other options that you're willing to captain and you're saying, I can happily bet against Erling Haaland for an extended period of time, then I think it is fine to go without him. And you can probably use the money that you're saving by not having Erling Haaland to bolster your side elsewhere. But captaincy is important, and looking at the next 5 game weeks, I think it's very likely that he's the best standout captain in most of those weeks, if not all 5. So look, if you're seeing this differently and you see another player or a cluster of players that maybe you could bet against Haaland every single week with captaincy, then by all means go without him and hope that he continues to blank. But I personally think that's very unlikely given that his chances are going to be bolstered by the return of Foden, by the return of Kevin De Bruyne, and the fixtures to come look absolutely mouth-watering for Haaland right now. So overall, I think he is a player that at times we can probably go without this season. I don't think you need to be scared about selling him, but you've got to be smart about when to do so. And looking at the fixtures coming over the next 5 game weeks, I certainly wouldn't be betting against him in those. So Cole Palmer up next, another player who has performed very, very well so far this season. In fact, he's actually got 1 more attacking return than Erling Haaland has thus far. And he's proven this year already that last year wasn't just a flash in the pan. He is a phenomenal talent who will continue to step it up a notch season after season. And again, I was a little bit, I suppose, cautious with Cole Palmer at the start of the season, mainly because we didn't know how Maresca would set up with him in the side. We knew he would play, but I think there was a bit of an assumption that maybe he could be operating off the right-hand side. He's obviously not. He's very central. He's in that number 10 role, which we know he's very effective in. And we just didn't know whether the data would regress slightly that we see with a lot of very good one-season wonders in previous years. Cole Palmer, though, has proven very, very quickly that he is not a one-season wonder. He's absolutely going to be a premium asset for years to come in FPL, as long as he stays in the league, of course. The question is then, when do we want to have him in our sides? Is now the right time, or can we wait until later on down the line? Is he just simply a player that you have in your FPL sides no matter what, no matter the fixture, and just rely on him to consistently get the points like we knew Salah to be over the last few seasons? And looking at the data so far, it's been a bit of a mixed bag in who they've played, but overall the fixture run hasn't been exactly terrible, but the data is very, very strong. So he's averaging 0.79 XGI per 90 so far. That's very promising. It's not Erling Haaland numbers just yet, but when you've got a midfielder who gets that extra point for the goal, he gets the extra point for the clean sheet as well, you can rely on them, I suppose, to be a little bit more explosive than the forwards. The forwards would need to bag a hat-trick to really reach those 20-point hauls. Cole Palmer, if he gets a hat-trick, he's looking more at like 24, 25 points most weeks. So this guy can explode to a much greater extent than a lot of the other players that we're talking about today. One, because of everything I've already mentioned, but two, he's also on penalties. He's getting 90 minutes. He's on quite a few set pieces as well. We saw his free kick the other week too. This guy ticks every single box you could imagine for an FPL asset. He's central, and a couple of other players we'll talk about later on today are maybe rivaling Cole Palmer in this position and at this price point, but aren't operating in that really central area that Cole is operating in at the moment. And quite frankly, I just don't really see any good reason not to have him in my side right now. The question is, does it actually need to be right now, or could it wait maybe a few game weeks time for a more optimal time to bring him in on a free transfer? Now, if I was on a wildcard this week, I would almost ignore the fixture set and I would look at Liverpool game week 8, I'd look at Arsenal game week 11 and think, you know what? If anyone's going to return against them, it's probably going to be Cole Palmer at this point in time. And if I was wildcarding, I wouldn't want to have to lock in a future transfer down the line to bring him in. I would just want him now. I'd just get that move sorted and have him in my side no matter what, regardless of the fixtures. I think also, for what it's worth, game week 8 is tough away at Liverpool. That's not an easy fixture, but they're without Alisson, and we don't know how much that's going to impact them. And you wouldn't really be surprised if Chelsea scored a goal, let's say, against Liverpool. Cole Palmer's got 69% goal involvement for Chelsea, so if they do get that goal, it's very likely, more likely than not, that Cole Palmer is going to be involved in that goal. So even this week and against Arsenal in game week 11, I wouldn't exactly be shocked to see him return. And if he returns, it's quite likely that he gets the bonus points as well. So you could be looking at an 8-9 point return, even if he gets one single return in those fixtures. Outside of that as well, game week 9, game week 10, and then 12 onwards looks absolutely fantastic. I'm not worried at all about Newcastle at home or Man United away. It's just those two red fixtures, Liverpool and Arsenal, that you might be put off slightly. And I think if you're just using transfers to get to Cole Palmer right now, perhaps you can wait. Perhaps you can bet against him for just a few game weeks and you can eye up a move in game week 12. But the other jumping on point, I would say, is possibly game week 9, where you've only really got one red fixture left, and that's obviously Arsenal in game week 11. But as a stretch of fixtures from 9 all the way through to, I think it's 18, 19, it's a really good run for Chelsea. So maybe just getting the transfer done earlier, sooner rather than later, would be the more optimal way of playing it. Of course, it's not always easy to shift these premiums about, and we'll come on to explain who could go at the moment that you might be able to bring Cole Palmer in for. So of course, we have to talk about Salah now. And Salah coming to the game at 12.5 million, pretty much the standard price that you'd expect Salah to be at. But importantly, it put him 2 million, maybe even 2.5 million above some of the other assets that really impressed last year that are becoming more and more talismanic for their sides. We're looking at Cole Palmer, we're looking at Bukayo Saka, of course, that also have penalties and also have really good data. Now, in previous seasons, the data, even for those picks, wasn't quite at the level of Salah. So I do completely understand why he's 2 million more. But looking at the data this year and also looking at the sort of role that he's playing, I would say that he's actually fulfilling a slot in our side that is equally significant as Palmer or Saka or even Son Heung-min as well at this point in time. He's getting around the same sort of minutes, but also we've seen him getting subbed off a little bit early sometimes in important games as well. And maybe that's slightly to do with the fact that they've got a load of depth. It's also maybe slightly to do with Arne Slot's mentality, I suppose you'd call it. In the past, we've seen him make regular subs with his wingers in particular around the 65th, 70th minute. This year, with Liverpool, seems to be no different. Mohamed Salah previously was kind of immune to those substitutions, but this year it's starting to sneak in a little bit more. And when we get through to the key Champions League fixtures over the next few weeks, I wouldn't be surprised to see Salah getting rested, or sorry, not completely rested, brought off earlier. If they're leading a game 2-0, 3-0, it's a bit more comfortable, just so he's fully rejuvenated for the midweek fixtures. He's obviously a fitness monster. We've all seen the topless pics he posts between the seasons every single year. He's clearly very, very fit, but he is getting older. He's not running at defenders maybe like he used to. And around the 70th, 75th minute, I wouldn't be shocked in some of these matches to see him taken off early if the game is wrapped up, or at least it seems the game is wrapped up. We even saw, I think it was Luis Diaz, come on at right wing for Salah in the previous game week. So we know that Arne Slot is willing to make those substitutions. The data is still great, and he's still, of course, on penalties. So when he's on the pitch, he's still very, very effective. But is he now more effective, or 2 million more effective than the likes of Cole Palmer or Bukayo Saka or even Son Heung-min? I'm not so sure that's the case. And if he's got a great run of fixtures, then of course he's going to be a fantastic option. And I am in no way saying he's not going to be scoring points, getting goals, getting assists week in, week out. But if you can save a bit of money and you can see maybe this next stretch of fixtures for Salah and Liverpool as maybe not the best run, Chelsea, Arsenal, Brighton, Villa, Southampton's obviously easy enough, but as a run of 5, it's not amazing. He's still going to return points, of course, but are the likes of Saka, Cole Palmer, Son likely to get more points, or at least similar points for less money? Quite possibly. So I think at this point in time, Salah has gone maybe down a notch from complete lock in our sides no matter what fixtures he's playing in, to in competition with some other players who are actually conveniently cheaper than him and quite easy to swap to if you're not really feeling Mo Salah at this point in time. So on to Bukayo Saka. There's a few different factors that we need to talk about here. One is, of course, the injury. Now, the injury he sustained with England on international duty looks to be fairly minor, although we don't have any sort of confirmation on that just yet. Lee Carsley came out in the press conference and said he was actually pretty close to being able to play in the second game in the international break. So you would imagine he's probably going to be okay for Bournemouth. And we know from history that Mikel Arteta will play him almost no matter what. Even if he's got one leg left, Saka usually tends to play. So I would be very surprised if Bukayo Saka doesn't play against Bournemouth away. But weirder things have happened. We do need to take that into consideration, and definitely just keep an eye out on press conference and team leaks as well, just to see if we are surprised and Bukayo Saka is injured. If he is, I think it's a pretty clear sell if you've got him, and of course avoid him if you don't already. Bournemouth away is the best fixture over the next 5. I think even that Nottingham Forest fixture in game week 12, whilst at home, Forest will sit back. They will have a very low block, and defensively, their numbers are actually very, very good. So whilst it's green on the ticker, it's not one that I would take lightly for Arsenal to maybe just blow them away. I don't think it's going to be as easy as that. And the 3 in between game week 8 and then are also maybe not necessarily easy. So Liverpool at home, Newcastle and Chelsea both away. If Saka is fit and you can have him in your side without necessarily needing to get to another premium asset, he's obviously going to be absolutely fine in all of those matches. I wouldn't be scared of owning him. I wouldn't say that he's inevitably going to blank in any of them, because he is the player he is. He's absolutely phenomenal. The data is fantastic. He's got 9 attacking returns in 7 game weeks already. He's got a great track record and he's on penalties. So we've got nothing to fear there with the fixtures. But because there are other premium assets and maybe sub-premium assets on the table at the moment, maybe if he is injured or carrying a little something, you could look at moving away from him over the next few weeks and have a plan to get back to him around game week 12 or beyond, when the fixtures do inevitably turn a little bit greener on the ticker once more. So I think this is a time that perhaps you could bet against him if you're feeling brave, but I would say, with a word of warning, he can return in any of these games. So if you've got him already, I think I'd probably only be selling if I knew he was injured. I've got him in my side, and I've got no plans to sell him this week ahead of Bournemouth unless it's confirmed that he is out. And even afterwards in game week 9, it would be with a very heavy heart that I would get rid of him, even for that short period of time over those 3 game weeks. I still think he'll be absolutely fine in those. The data's great, although it is worth noting, just before we move on, that the shot volume is very high for Saka, but the quality of shots, or not necessarily the quality of shots he's taking, but the positions he's taking the shots from, supply us with a very low XG. So I think the average shot that he's taking at the moment has a 0.05 XG so far. That means there's a 5% chance on average of that shot hitting the back of the net. He's obviously a very good finisher, so you would expect him to maybe overperform on that. But he will need a higher shot volume to maybe get the kind of goal return that we're used to seeing from the likes of a Cole Palmer, who's got a higher XG and a higher XG per shot as well. Same goes with Son, same goes with Salah. So with Saka, you really need those numbers bumped up quite a lot to expect the same sort of goal returns. But he does make up with it on the assists as well. He creates a lot of chances. So this guy, great on the bonus, great on the assists, not bad on the goals either. He's a very, very good pick. And it would only be with a very heavy heart that I even imagine getting rid of him next week. Only way I'm getting rid of him right now is if he is injured for Bournemouth. So one player that is sneaking significantly under the radar at the moment is Son Heung-min, but he will be a factor this season, and I think he will prove over time why he's in this sub-premium category alongside the likes of the Sakas, the Fodens, and the Cole Palmers of the world. He's on penalties, he usually gets 90 minutes, and the data is usually phenomenal. And this is more of a subjective point, but he is one of the best finishers in the league, in my opinion. He usually overperforms his XG numbers quite significantly. I think if you go and look at, I think it's the XG philosophy on Twitter, they put out a graph every now and then showing who the overperformers are over their careers on expected goals versus actual goals. Son is one of the only players that consistently breaks away from the average expected goals and overperforms on those numbers. So he is, for all, I guess, subjective data that you could possibly gather, quite a good finisher. The data so far this season is worse than the likes of Saka, worse than the likes of Palmer, worse than the likes of Salah as well. But he's still gotten 2 goals, 2 assists, and he's had an injury as well. So this is off of fairly limited minutes, which is why he's had the price drop and he's only 4.5% owned. However, good news on the horizon though. We're getting word from Spurs at the moment that they're expecting him back in training this week ahead of game week 8. Now, if he is fit ahead of game week 8, that run of fixtures over the next 4 weeks, West Ham, Palace, who have been struggling so far this season, Aston Villa and Ipswich at home, that's 3 home games in the next 4. 3 really decent fixtures in there as well. Villa's the more tough one, you would say, overall. I would say that Son is going to be a very interesting differential if he's confirmed fit ahead of game week 8. We've spoken about Cole Palmer, we've spoken about Saka and Salah already, all 3 of which have gotten maybe not the best run of fixtures over the next 4 game weeks. And if you were to back against them, Son would maybe be my first pick, my first choice to try and take a punt, maybe steal a march on other managers in your mini leagues by getting in Son now when he's back from injury with the great fixture run. Spurs are creating a lot of chances at the moment, and I think people are just forgetting quite how good Son can be on his day. You'd imagine he's still on penalties. He'll get back up to 90 minutes pretty quickly, you'd think as well. And as long as he's fit, I really like him as a differential. If I was on wildcard this week, and I'm not, sadly, I think I'd probably take a punt on him as one of my 2 premium midfielders for a short period of time up until game week 11, then maybe have a plan to switch across to either Saka or Palmer, whichever one I go without for the time being, because the fixture swing then obviously goes the other way, and Arsenal and Chelsea both have good fixtures after that. So I think there's quite a nice little premium swapping you could do right now. And if you've got a few free transfers and you know that he's fit, then I think having Son for the next 4 game weeks, just bringing him in for the likes of Saka if he's injured, or maybe you could upgrade the likes of a Luis Diaz if you're not too convinced by him and you've got a bit of money that you can use. And I really like him as an option, and I think he's worth noting as a player that I expect to be a significant factor over the next 4 game weeks. So we can't do a premium video without talking about the most premium defender in the game, and that, of course, is Trent Alexander-Arnold. And the reason I think this is really important to talk about now is with transfers ahead in mind. Now, we've talked already about Salah, and the fixtures for Liverpool aren't the best. With Salah, you kind of expect attacking returns no matter what the fixture. Maybe a little bit down on the averages because of the fixture difficulty, but you still expect returns. With Trent, it's possibly a slightly different story. Maybe you still expect the attacking returns here or there, but even as good as he is, the data is nowhere near the likes of a premium midfielder or striker. You still only expect an attacking return in 50% of the games at absolute most, and with the tougher games, maybe a little bit less than that. With Trent, though, you are a little bit more reliant on the assists than the goals. In fact, quite a lot more reliant on the assists than the goals. The assist data is very good, but you still only get 3 points for the assist. So if they're not keeping clean sheets, and of course Trent isn't expected to score goals that regularly, he might get the odd free kick, as we saw on international duty and in the past for Liverpool as well. But you're not expecting that every single week. And I think with Trent, you have to be careful to not overestimate the attacking returns that you're expecting from him, whilst he's very, very good. And I've talked extensively about just how amazing he is as an asset in defence. So do not think this is me anti-Trent propaganda against him. I'm really, really pro-Trent. But with the next run of fixtures coming, and what a lot of people are looking at in the midfield, we're looking at maybe a 2 premium structure in midfield and Haaland up front in a lot of cases. That's simply not going to be possible in most scenarios unless you look at downgrading funds, or releasing funds rather, in your defence. And Trent is probably the make weight for a lot of people who can't quite afford that 3 premium structure in midfield and up front. So the question then becomes, is Trent going to be worth getting rid of over the next few game weeks, given that we know he can return attacking wise in any game week, even with these fixtures to come? Is the fact that Liverpool are less likely to keep clean sheets over the next 4 fixtures. In fact, I'd say over the next 7 or 8 fixtures. After Southampton in game week 12, they go into Man City and Newcastle after that. So it's a not necessarily easy run of games to keep clean sheets in. They've been fantastic so far this season. The data's great. They've kept a lot of clean sheets, but the fixture run itself has been favourable, you would say, in the first 7 game weeks on average. Man United was obviously probably the toughest of those games so far, but defensively the data's absolutely fantastic. So they have been improved. There's much more of an emphasis on control than maybe under Klopp in the past. So even in this run of fixtures, I still think they'll keep the odd clean sheet. It's just whether or not Trent at 7.1 million is going to still supply us with the amount of points that you need to maybe counteract all of those other teams out there without Trent, but with 2 premiums in their midfield. And I think that's a really important question that you need to come up with an answer with in the next few days if you are considering selling Trent. Is he going to continue to score points? Yes, I think he will. But is he going to continue to score the points that are necessary to maybe take on those managers who do have the 2 premium structure in midfield? That is possibly up for debate. So that's a question I need to answer myself over the coming days. At the moment, I'm maybe quite tempted to take a chance against him and look at other defenders who I'm not necessarily expecting that many clean sheets from, but they've got a good run of fixtures. They're much cheaper, and it allows me a route to upgrading what would be an 8 million midfielder up to a 10.8 if it was Palmer as well. And it gives me two premiums in the midfield, and I can start swapping between them over the next few game weeks, which we'll obviously come on to discuss. So now we're going to talk about two Man City assets, which I think it's fair to say we've put to one side for the first few game weeks, and I think that's been warranted as well. Phil Foden came back from the Euros, obviously struggling with something a little bit, didn't get good minutes at the start of the season at all, and has been building up match fitness for quite some time now. It's actually taking him all the way to game week 7 to get his first start for City this season. So he has been struggling a little bit, and we definitely haven't seen the Phil Foden that we saw last year that got 27 attacking returns, was one of the top point scorers in the entire league, and warranted that move up to 9.5 for the price tag this year. We haven't seen that at all. And what it's meant is, maybe fortunately for us, he's now down to 9.2, and at that little bit cheaper, that little bit more accessible for us when we do eventually make the decision to bring him in, when we think that he's going to be back to his best. Now, the question really is with Phil Foden is, when do we expect that to be? Is that now, or do we still need to wait for a few game weeks to pass before we can be fully confident that he's back to his full fitness, back to the kind of Phil Foden that we saw this time last year, perhaps, firing in hat-tricks, I think twice last season, and really doing a lot of damage to anyone who didn't have him at that point in time? With Foden right now, there's an opportunity. He's only 5.5% owned. He's a bit cheaper than you'd expect him to be. And as soon as he reintegrates fully into the Man City lineup, you'd expect him to play centrally, to almost be that ancillary striker to Haaland that we saw last year, and he performed so well in that role. You'd expect it again this year. I think we even saw that a little bit in game week 7 as well. There were little flashes of it, and whilst he didn't get any attacking returns in that game, I think there were a couple of times where he got quite close to getting the ball, receiving the ball on the turn, and obviously that would have been quite a big chance at that point in time. So with Foden, it's basically just, do you want to take the risk now, knowing the upside that could be coming in the next 3 or 4 game weeks specifically, maybe even 5, looking at the fixture run? If he is playing in those fixtures, if he is getting 80, 90 minutes, and he's anywhere near the Phil Foden that we saw last season, 9.2 is going to be very cheap, and this data is going to improve pretty quickly. I think, again, with Man City, what we need to assess is, are all of the chances going to just be hoovered up by Erling Haaland again this year? Or are there going to be moments or situations in matches where Foden arrives in the box late, maybe gets the cutback from wide angles, and still gets the chances that we saw him getting in flashes last year? Is he going to still receive those chances? I think the answer for me is that he's too good a player for Man City and Pep not to feed him with those chances if he's in that number 10 role. And I do expect him to be explosive once again this year. It's just whether or not, given those fixtures, he's going to be reliable enough that we can back him straight away in game week 8 against Wolves, which could be a huge opportunity to get on him quickly when he's really differential. Maybe you do get a haul out of him before anyone else gets to him, but there's also the risk there. He could be benched. We obviously saw him benched for England in the second game. That, I think, was more tactical than anything else. But he could easily be benched in game week 8. No one would be that surprised if that happened. And if he is, then you've wasted not only a transfer, but also a premium slot, which could be a Palmer, it could be a Saka, it could be a Son, and all of those players are quite likely to return, and they're almost guaranteed to play 90 minutes, maybe with the asterisks of, if they're injured, obviously that's not going to be the case. But if they are fully fit, they're going to play, and they're going to be very central to all of the chance creation, to a lot of the XG that their teams are creating. You can't really say the same for Phil Foden. He's maybe the second most important asset, attacking-wise, in Man City. And Haaland is going to get the majority of chances. It's just whether or not Man City are creating so many chances that Foden's still going to be able to feast on, not the scraps, but you get what I mean. It's the second portion after Haaland has eaten up all of the chances that he wants to have in that game. Is Foden also going to get his share? I still think that he's a very good option. It's just whether or not he's going to be explosive enough that he warrants that second premium spot, which is going to be important this year. Again, a bit like with Son, the fixtures are great though, So if you want to take the chance, if you want to take the gamble and get that upside potentially, then Phil Foden could be the one. I won't spend too long on Kevin De Bruyne because a lot of the points I raised for Phil Foden also apply to Kevin De Bruyne. The fixtures are great, the upside is good, and of course, he's going to be one of Man City's chief creators when he's in the side, but he's got fitness doubts I think are going to become more regular now. I think we saw it last season quite a lot. I think we're also going to start seeing it more and more this year too. But when he's fit and when he's in that lineup, the data is still phenomenal and he's still an absolute class act. So a bit like with Phil Foden, if you want to take a risk on the minutes, then you could see significant upside from him, and possibly even more so than the likes of Saka or Palmer or Salah even over the next few game weeks, given the run of fixtures that Man City have. But if I'm being pragmatic with Kevin De Bruyne, whilst the upside is there, I think he's less likely now to supply that upside consistently enough that you could rely on him for points over even a medium stretch of fixtures, whereas all of the other players we've talked about so far today, maybe with Phil Foden to one side, are much more central to their teams and much more crucial to everything they're doing. So they're almost never going to rest those players. They're almost guaranteed to start every single week. And Kevin De Bruyne is a fantastic player, but Man City have a lot of fantastic players now, and De Bruyne is getting older. He's not quite so consistent with his minutes now, as we've seen. And with a premium spot, they are very, very precious. And every week that you've got a premium that isn't playing, or maybe getting minutes off the bench, or maybe getting taken off early, that's an opportunity that you're potentially missing elsewhere. So with Kevin De Bruyne, I wouldn't advise anyone not to go there because the upside is definitely there. The data's great. He's a phenomenal player. But for me, I like those consistent minutes for your premium assets. And when there are lots of other assets around his price point that are getting those minutes and are on penalties, are more central to the goal threat that their teams are creating, I think I prefer other players in this position right now. But undoubtedly, the upside is there. So if you want to take a risk on the minutes with these next 5 fixtures, you could be quids in. So I wanted to wrap up today's video by taking a look at the fixture run over the next 9 or 10 game weeks to see where the opportunities are for a bit of premium swapping if you wanted to plan ahead. And I think what's really important here is to note that all of these players are going to return consistently pretty much regardless of the fixtures, but it's trying to find the points in time where they're more likely to return and more likely to return in big batches or clumps. So you're looking for those four goals that Palmer scored. You're looking for a Salah hat-trick, a Son goal assist. You're looking for big explosive returns here or there. And obviously, nicer fixtures, especially nicer home fixtures, are more likely to supply those big explosive returns. And the more of them you can jump on this season, the better your overall rank is going to end up being, especially if you jump on them when other managers might not have reacted quickly enough. So looking at the fixtures for these 5 teams, the 5 teams with the premium assets in them this year, and looking over a long period of time to see whether or not there are opportunities to hop on, hop off, and shift between them is going to be really important. So what I'm doing here, 9 fixtures ahead, I think it is. Yeah, so 9 ahead. So from game week 8 all the way through to game week 16. I've taken this from FPL Team, which, by the way, is an absolutely fantastic website and app. So do check that out. This is not an advert. Peter, who runs the app, is absolutely fantastic. So do please go and check that out if you get the chance. In the meantime, though, let's take a quick look at the fixtures for these 5 teams. What I think is important to note, and I won't get too bogged down in this section, this will be a bit quicker, but the top 3 teams on the schedule, Arsenal, Chelsea and Liverpool, you would say the next 4 game weeks for all of them are possibly not ideal. Now, again, like I mentioned at the start, all of the premium options in these teams, I still expect to return goals, assists, they'll get points, and I would be surprised if they didn't get 2 or 3 returns each in the next 4 game weeks, even with those fixtures. But then you look below at Man City and Spurs, and those are also teams with very good premium assets, some of which are on penalties, most of which are getting 90 minutes, who could also get returns in all of those next 4 fixtures, but also have the benefit of better fixtures objectively over the next 4 game weeks. So you're looking at Southampton at home for Man City in game week 9. You're looking at West Ham and Ipswich at home for Spurs in game week 8 and 11. And not really any really tough games where you'd maybe not expect their premium assets to return. So I do think there is an opportunity in the next 4 game weeks, especially if you're on a wild card. And the reason I say that is because there are no maximum transfers that you can use. You can just completely reshape your squad for the next 4 game weeks right now and maybe take a punt on a Foden or a Son, definitely on a Haaland, but you can build the side perfectly with the next 4 game weeks in mind. And because you can roll transfers, hopefully for the next few game weeks, by the time you get to game week 12 and that fixture swing occurs, you can use a couple of those free transfers to just bring back in the likes of Saka or Palmer or even a Salah as well. So all of these assets are going to be great the whole season, but because they're all within this same sort of price point together, with Haaland to one side, of course, you do have to time when you think they're going to be the most important and maybe try to guess at what points they're more likely to get those explosive returns. So I think there is an opportunity over the next 4 game weeks. You could do it with free transfers. It's certainly something I'm considering, moving away from your Liverpool assets, for instance, and moving towards a Phil Foden or a Son Heung-min. But I think the one other player I wanted to talk about now before we wrap up is Cole Palmer. Whilst the next 4 fixtures don't look ideal, once that game week 8 is out the way, over the span of the next 8, I actually still really like it. I think Newcastle and Man United as 2 games, I don't think I'd be that worried about Cole Palmer returning. I think he's probably quite likely, considering, as I mentioned, he's about 70% goal involvement. I think he's the one player that I'd maybe put to one side and say, I back him even in those games. Arsenal's a tough one, but over the stretch, I think you can maybe forgive the next 4 fixtures and say that actually, as a stretch, it's not so bad. But like I said, maybe a bit of swapping will work out quite well this season, and looking and taking a punt on the likes of a Son or a Foden or even a Kevin De Bruyne over the next few game weeks might help you to steal a march on your opponents, especially in your mini leagues. Now, as we reach the end of today's video, if you've enjoyed it, and hopefully you have, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'm aiming for 100 likes on this video. Doesn't seem like much, but to me, it is actually a big number, so it would mean the world to me if you did. And I'll see you later on this week as we take a look at my team selection ahead of game week 8.